Assalamu alaikum, dear attendants. Welcome to this session of our Islam Study Circle. We begin by studying a selected verse of the Quran, and this verse is actually there are actually three verses that we're going to study. This is Surah 41, verses 33 to 35. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم. And good and evil are not equal. Avenge evil with good, and he with whom you have enmity will become your dearest friend. And none will attain this wisdom except those who are patient, and none will attain it except the very fortunate. Dear viewers, you can see these Quranic verses spell out a very important message for us, and it actually relates to our everyday relations, in which, of course, we come across a lot of problems. We have rivalries, we have jealousies, we have people who would like to put us down, and all the time we are facing these challenges. And one way to cope with these challenges is to react or to retaliate in equal coins. Thus, for example, if someone is jealous of us, or someone is annoying us, or someone is harming us, we do have this opportunity as well as this option, which is also given by the Quran, that if we want, we can pay back in equal coins, and we can also uh, retaliate in equal measure. But at various instances in the Quran, it has been said that if you forgive people for their bad attitude, then you might win a foe, and that foe might become your friend. And precisely this is what these verses here are actually pointing out. And they are actually spelling out a very specific procedure. And what they say is that if you requite evil with good, in other words, if you pay back evil by good attitude. So the Quran says, the person with whom you have enmity, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. He will become your bosom friend. He will become your dearest friend. So a person with whom you have enmity, if you start smiling back at him, if you do not react at his or her bad attitude, if you befriend him or try to befriend him, you don't evade him, you do not count your scores against him, and instead you treat him as if you treat any person. And the best way that you can treat an enemy is that you always highlight his follies. You always highlight his, I'm sorry, you always highlight his good points, and you actually uh, downplay his follies or her follies. So the best way to treat your rival is that you actually encourage that person by mentioning his good abilities, by mentioning his capabilities in absentia. And of course, this is bound to reach him or her in various ways. And when this happens, he or she would of course think very positively about the person. So one of these ways is that you appreciate and encourage the person. And I have said this previously as well, that appreciation and encouragement should not be confined to your friends. Even your rivals need to be appreciated, because not every person is totally bad. Not every person has 100% bad habits. Every person, whoever he is or she is, he or she might be having some good qualities, some abilities, and we need to encourage that person. We need to highlight his or her qualities, because who knows that this attitude might reform that person, might make him or her notice that he or she is doing something, or harming the other person. So one way to requite evil is by adopting a very good attitude towards that person, a very, very positive attitude. And not only this, another thing which, of course, even the Prophet Muhammad encouraged, and we have seen this in practice as well, that when we start giving gifts to a person with whom we have enmity or rivalry, or maybe a cold relationship, simply by giving a good present or a good gift, expresses our sincerity, it expresses our friendship towards that person, and he or she changes. And remember, this rivalry is not just an extreme issue. It does have its expression even in very close relationships. This rivalry, not to forget, is there even amongst spouses. It's there between siblings. It's there between parents and children as well. And of course, it's there between colleagues and associates. So it's not just you find this extreme rivalry and people are not on speaking terms. Of course, that's a very extreme case. But less than that, there is this cold relationship that you have between very close people, between very, in fact, close people. As I said, seldom is there anything closer or any relationship closer than a spouse relationship or a parental relationship or a sibling relationship. And as I said, it happens even in these relationships. So the best way to cope with this relationship, especially if it's getting tough, if it's getting out of hands, if it's getting difficult to cope, is to adopt an extreme good attitude. And of course, for this, you require patience. And that is precisely what this verse says. وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. That when you pay back an evil person or a person who has a bad attitude, and you do so by adopting a good attitude, a congenial attitude, a friendly attitude, it requires a lot of patience. And the verse says, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. Only those can achieve this and this wisdom who are patient. And of course, patience here means steadfastness, because whenever someone downplays you, whenever someone shows his or her annoyance with you, and that is also unfounded, you tend to get upset. You tend to get angry and annoyed. And it's only this patience and steadfastness which makes you cling on to that slim hope of not retaliating or not reacting, and instead putting up an extremely good behavior. So, as the Quranic verse says, that you have to show patience. If you want to win a foe and make him and convert him into a friend, then the biggest patience, the biggest asset that is needed is patience. And this can only happen when you have a strong relationship with the Almighty. If you have a strong God connection, you will have patience. And this is precisely what the Quran has pointed out at one place. وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. It says that unless you have a strong relationship with the Almighty, unless you have a very strong God connection, you cannot have this patience, because you tolerate people's or the evil attitudes because of this God connection, because of the fact you know that you will be compensated ultimately, and also you'll win the pleasure of God by reacting in a positive way and by actually, I would say, winning a moral victory over your friend or your friend who is acting as a foe. So it's like a moral victory that you will gain, and there's no bigger a victory than moral victory. When you are morally victorious, you feel that you have actually conquered the heart of the other person. It's not that you have won or the other person has lost, as is the case with other victories. In fact, what has actually been achieved is this moral victory. And when you achieve a moral victory, you become a person who is endeared to the other person, a likable person, a person who always wins the hearts of his opponents. So that is precisely what this Quranic verse has told us. And then these verses go on to say, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَظٍّ عَظِيمٍ. That those who achieve this position of wisdom are indeed very fortunate. And of course, this is very understandable, because when a person is patient and a person has this wisdom, then he is bound to be a person who has a lot of good fortune and a lot of good luck on his side. And this is how the Almighty praises that person, that only the fortunate are such people, that they are able to show this wisdom of retaliating evil by a good attitude. And you must have heard in your own childhood, maybe, or at several other places, and Jesus is also reported to have said that if someone slaps on you on your one cheek, present him the other one. This is precisely the same ethics which the Quran also has highlighted here, that if someone is bad to you, you should not be bad to him. And remember, this is is a rule in general. It's a principle that we have to follow, that if someone is good to us and we are good to that person in return, then this is not much of an achievement. After all, it's very simple and very fairly easy to be good in return for good. But it's fairly difficult to be good when the other person is acting wrongly, when the other person is undermining us, when the other person is being jealous of us, and he or she has a stronger right on us, and at times he or she is able to convince other people against us, and we are absolutely innocent in that regard. So it is here that we need character, and as this verse spells out, that this character only comes with patience, and patience is something which only comes when you have a strong God connection. So let us pray that we have a strong God connection. Let us pray that we have this connectivity with the Almighty, because it's this support that we have from the Almighty which really helps us in warding off this reaction. And it's our first instinctive reaction whenever someone else does wrong to us is that we try to pay back that person on equal footings. If he is angry with us and says something bad, we, of course, try to do the same. But it is here that we need to just get hold of ourselves for an instant, because it's just that flash, that momentary flash, that in that particular split second, if we are able to conquer ourselves, if we are able to conquer that adrenaline which pumps in our blood, it is here that we will achieve moral victory. It is here that we will be able to actually calm down ourselves. And if we are just able to delay our reaction, we have won the day, my dear. And that is how we have to train ourselves. Remember, life is nothing but training and educating ourselves, especially our attitudes, how we react in times of sorrow, how we react in times of grief, in times of happiness, in times of depression. So divine scriptures, one of the greatest contributions of divine scriptures is that they tell us how to behave, and they tell us how to react in situations, and they also tell us how we can win and conquer the hearts of people. So viewers, now let's move on to the next part of our study circle, and this is hadith of the day that we're going to study. And this hadith is actually taken from one of the 6 canonical collections, which is called Shehzad, and the particular hadith book that from which this hadith is taken is called the Sunan of Abu Dawud. So this narrative is from Abdullah ibn Umar, who of course was the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the famous companion of the Prophet. So the words are, Abdullah ibn Umar يقول جاء رجل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا رسول الله كم نعفو عن الخادم فالصمت ثم أعاد عليه الكلام فالصمت فلما كان في الثالثة قال اعفو عنه في يوم 70 مرة. Abdullah ibn Umar says that a person came to the Prophet and asked him, O Messenger of God, how many times should we forgive our servant? At this, he, which of course is the Prophet, he remained silent. The question was repeated to him, of course, the second time, and he still remained silent. When he was posed this question a third time, he replied, forgive him 70 times every day. So viewers, of course, the word 70 here is used as basically a metaphor. It's symbolic, and what the Prophet is implying here is that if you're a servant or someone who is subservient to you, someone who works for you, someone who is your worker, if he or she commits a mistake, and of course we all commit mistakes, then it's better to forgive your servant, your attendant, your person who is subservient to you. And of course here the implication is that when the mistake which is done, at times it is inadvertent, at times it is not planned, at times a person is inattentive. So there are so many scenarios, but our Prophet has told us that we have to be magnanimous. We have to be very, very large-hearted. If our servant, if our associate, if our subservient, or anyone who is answerable to us, he does something wrong, look what the Prophet has said, that we should forgive him 70 times every day, which of course means that every single day we have to show this magnanimity. And you know what, viewers? All of us do the same because we also are servants of God. If someone is servant to us, we in our own capacity are answerable to someone else. And if we want ourselves to be forgiven, and if we want ourselves that we should be taken care of and we should be treated in a magnanimous way, let us reciprocate by treating others in a magnanimous way. Remember what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have been told what he was reported to have said regarding one of his favorite attendants, Anas ibn Malik. His attendant is reported to have said that not once in his service to the Prophet did the Prophet ever say to him, "Why did you do this? And why did not you do this?" In other words, implying the fact that he would never criticize his servant for his mistake. In other words, he would try to educate him and elevate his level and try to direct his attention in such a way that the person in future becomes more careful in his mistake. So when you try to correct a person, especially if someone is subservient to you, there is a tact to this, there is a skill to this. Abusing that person, scolding that person, of course, is not only immoral, but at times it is counterproductive also. Because if we want someone to do something in a pleasant way, in a good way, in an optimum way, and he does not do that, or she does not do that, then of course there is a method to correcting that person. And amongst those methods that all of us know, the biggest method is forgiveness. Because the way forgiveness works, no other thing can work. If a person realizes his or her folly simply because he or she has been shown this mitigation, this lenience, this concession, the other person always wakes up. The other person always is moved by this magnanimous and this large-hearted attitude. So let us be large-hearted. Let us be more forgiving. Let us especially forgive people who work for us, and more often than not, the mistakes they commit are out of ignorance, are out of at times not knowing how the whole procedure is, or out of pure accident, because these accidents can happen in our own lives as well. And let me here narrate to you an incident which happened in my life, and which I always remember, and I do narrate to people. And I always think that it's a reminder from the Almighty to myself. It happened some years ago. I personally am a person who is very finicky regarding my car, and I don't let scratches come to my car. And whenever someone or something happens in which my car gets scratched or dented, I immediately have it repaired. So it happened one day that my driver was reversing the car, and he accidentally hit something behind. There was a gate, the part of that gate got hit, and the car actually had a bad dent on its rear bumper. And when I came to know of what had happened, I was really annoyed, and I ticked off my driver. And later on, I was very ashamed at why I had been such harsh on my driver, and I was really I actually asked his forgiveness. But what happened next day actually was even more revealing for me, and it made me. I learned a lesson of my life by that. And what happened was that I was reversing my car, and on very similar lines, it happened that I actually stuck that car, or my car got bumped into something, and a bigger dent came about. And that bumper, which I had just repaired the previous day, was once again dented. And this time the dent was much bigger. And suddenly it struck me that the Almighty has actually warned me, and the Almighty has cautioned me that if a driver can make a mistake, then the person to whom that driver is accountable to can also make a mistake. And this has stuck my mind ever since. And I shudder whenever I recall this, that this is how we have to be reminded that if we tick off our servants for something which they did out of accident, out of pure accident, and it was not a planned mistake, then this is how the Almighty wants us, that He wants us to forgive such people, because similar accidents or even worse can be committed by us, and we can be in the same receiving spot as well. And therefore we have to remind ourselves that working for someone, and of course, at the same time, showing this magnanimity is something which is always asked for. And remember, the biggest master is the Almighty Himself. He's the master of the Day of Judgment, Maliki Yawmiddin. And as such, we all are answerable to Him, and we all want His forgiveness. We all want Him that He shows magnanimity to us, and He does not pick our faults, and He forgives us for our small faults. So it's that famous golden rule that always must be in our mind, that when we expect something from someone, so we should also expect others to behave in a similar way regarding our own selves. So if we expect forgiveness from our superiors, let us be forgiving to our juniors and those people who are answerable to us. And this is how we're going to win hearts. This is how we can actually even reform that person. That person might be actually reformed simply in the manner in which we have tried to correct him. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are people who are habitual in their follies, so they are not ones who are discussed here, and they are an exception generally. For them, there are other methods of reproof and rectification. So let us now go on to the third part of our study circle, and this is the Bible verse of the day. And in fact, these are more than one verses, to be exact, 8 of them. And these are taken from the Gospel of St. Luke. And the verses read, and the title that I've given them is Jesus on Humility. And he gave teaching in the form of a story to the guests who came to the feast. When he saw how they took the best seats, saying to them, when you get a request to come to a feast, do not take the best seat, for a more important man than you may be coming. And then the giver of the feast will come to you and say, give your place to this man. And you with shame will have to take the lowest seat. But when you come, go and take the lowest seat, so that when the giver of the feast comes, he may say to you, friend, come up higher, and then you will have honor in the eyes of all the others who are there. For every man who gives himself a high place, will be put down, but he who takes a low place will be lifted up. So this is the first part of the famous parable which Jesus has actually described here, and it's an object lesson in humility. And it tells us that whenever we visit someone, we should humbly sit in the back rows, or maybe in the rows which are reserved for people of our background. And instead of going to the most prominent of seats, it's better to always take an unnoticeable seat, because there's always this possibility that you will be displaced from your place because there are other people invited for that place. So if there is this distinction, then we have to be very careful and act in a humble manner. It's not something which is humiliating for us if we sit on a back seat or a seat which is not that noticeable. In fact, it is something of an honor, because this is how we should react and treat ourselves, that when we come to some place and that place is unmarked, then we have to be in a place or at a place which is also unmarked as far as possible, because this shows our attitude, and it shows how we feel about ourselves and how we conduct ourselves and how we carry ourselves. And then it goes on to say, and he said to the master of the house, when you give a feast, do not send for your friends and your brothers and your family or your neighbors who have wealth, for they may have a feast for you, and so you will get a reward. So this is the second thing which Jesus is actually instructing. But when you give a feast, send for the poor and the blind and those who are broken in body. And you will have a blessing, because they will not be able to give you any payment, and you will get your reward when the upright come back from the dead. And hearing these words, one of those who were at table with him said to him, happy is the man who will be a guest in the kingdom of God. Such moving and such beautiful words. And you can see it's still a translation. It's just a translation. And we can well imagine that had we access to the original language of these words, how utterly moving they would have been. Because if the translation is so moving, we can only imagine what the original would be like. And this is the second part which Jesus has actually explained regarding his whole concept, and that is that when you invite people to your feasts, when you invite people to your dinners and to various functions that we hold, the stress that he is actually laying upon is that never neglect people who might who might be known to you, who might be blind, who might be crippled, who might be handicapped, who might be poor, and simply because you think that they are poor, because they are not up to your own standard or status, you do not invite them. It is this particular thing which Jesus is trying to rectify in ourselves and telling us that it's easy to invite people who are of the same status. So if you send for our brothers and our family and our neighbors who are wealthy, it's like calling people of our own status on such instances. But what actually should be done is, of course, the stress here is not that we should not invite people who are rich. It's not the stress. The stress is, in fact, that if we are inviting the rich, then we should not neglect the poor as well. And we must not neglect people who are lower in status and are known to us simply because they are lower in status. And I think that this speaks volumes of this humanitarian attitude and this human uh, inclination that all of us must have. All of us must link ourselves to our brethren, regardless of their caste, regardless of their status, regardless of who they are. As long as they are human beings, as long as they belong to our fraternity, they are respectable to us. They must be revered. They must be regarded as human beings, and they must not be regarded as children of a lesser God. They are equal to all of us. As human beings, each and every person of us, whatever be the creed, whatever be our color, whatever be our race, we are all the progeny of one parent, Adam and Eve. Since we are the progeny of one parent, we are a large family, and every person of that family is equal to the other person. No one is superior. And this is what Jesus has actually stressed here. And as the first part you would recall also is a lesson in humility, that we have to be humble in our ways. When we come to visit people, let's not sit in the most dominant or the most noticeable place. Let's sit at a place which is not that noticeable and it's not that coveted. And also, when we invite people to our feasts, we must not neglect our poor relatives, our poor friends or relatives or associates who are lesser in status. So, with these words, dear viewers, we come to an end to our first session. And if you have any questions, I'll unmute your mic. And once we are through with this part, inshallah, we'll go on to the next part. So, I see one hand being raised. I'm going to unmute Madam Rafia Khwaja. Uh, Kindly unmute your mic. It's self-muted. You have to unmute your mic. Yes, please go ahead.
Um, Stalin, Dr. Shehzad, I wanted to ask you about Miraj. So far, I thought the Miraj, the Prophet ﷺ took place was a dream. But recently, I saw two videos from the United States where two scholars are talking about Miraj and said that the Prophet went to heaven, met Allah, talked to him, saw him, and he saw the other Rasuls and the Anbiya. So this has really confused me that is this authentic? Did he really travel and meet Allah and saw him? I was always told it was just a simple dream that Hazrat Aisha described.
So we have to take the verdict of the Quran for this. The Quran has expressly called this to be a dream. The Quran in Surah Bani Israel, where this narration has been described, in the very first verse of Surah Bani Israel, when the words which describe this journey of the Prophet, the words are Subhanallazi asra bi'abdihi layla min al-masjid al-haram, which means that glory be to the God who took the Prophet from this place to the other place, and then of course the whole sequence is described. And then later on in the surah it says, وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الرُّؤْيَا الَّتِي إِلَّا أَرَيْنَاكَ إِلَّا فِتْنَةً لِلنَّاسِ, which means that the dream that we showed you, O Prophet, was because we had to try and test people in a certain way. Because of course he was shown certain things in that dream in a symbolic way, and these dream, the way it was, they were described in that dream, these things became a sort of trial and test for people when they were told that this and this happened. So basically, the Quran itself has given its verdict that this it was a spiritual journey. It was not a physical journey. Of course, if the Almighty wanted, He could have made this possible. The physical journey was always possible. We are not denying the fact that spiritual journey is an impossibility with God. What we are saying is that the Quran itself has called this journey to be a spiritual journey which took place in a vision, in a dream shown to the Prophet. And as you said, Aisha radiallahu anha and Amir Muawiyah, two of the famous companions of the Prophet, they actually have said that this is something which took place in a dream. The narrative in the Hadith books, like for example, the narrative which is found in Bukhari, tells us that the Prophet was between this state uh, of drowsiness and awakening, and in a state of consciousness that this happened. So the Quran itself, and then of course these famous companions themselves have given their verdict, and I think that there could not be two opinions, because had the Quran not been silent on this, we could have had this discussion. And if you ask me that if the Quran is so explicit, then why is there such a big difference of opinion still? So the reason is that the Quranic words which say the word roya in Arabic is the equivalent of the English equivalent of dream. So these people say, who interpret it differently, that the word roya does mean to see someone when someone is conscious, like the word royat, as you say, royat hilal, which means seeing something by your eyes when they are open. So the word royat in Arabic means seeing someone with your naked eye, and roya means when your eyes are shut and you are actually dreaming. So unfortunately, what happened is when they saw this narrative in some of the hadith books, they took it literally, and this made them even change the translation of the Quranic word roya, and instead of translating it as something which is shown when your eyes are shut, of course, implying the fact it is a dream, they said that this roya is not roya, it's royat, which means being shown something when your eyes are open. So they changed the meaning of roya and converted into royat, which means, as I said, see something by your naked eye. And this is how this whole confusion started very earlier on. It is still going on. And I think, as is the case, that if we just refer back to the Quran and we just uh, ask the Quran, that gives us sufficient answer. And as far as debate is concerned, of course, if you have a different approach towards religion, this can still go on. But if your approach is that the Quran is the final authority in all religious matters, then, as I said, the Quran is explicit in telling us that this happened in the Prophet's dream.
Dr. Shehzad, just want to tell you that these are two scholars from Al-Qalam Institute in Texas, in
Yes,
USA, and they are supposed to be very, very learned. So I saw the whole video, and he's actually saying that the Prophet saw the people in hell and heaven and spoke to Allah. So I was so confused that I didn't know whether I should watch it or not.
what has been described actually here is some of the narratives which are found in Hadith books, in Bukhari in particular, and those Hadith books actually present graphic details of what the Prophet saw. But again, when I say the Prophet saw, I we imply that he saw in his dream. So remember, dreams are not to be interpreted literally. Dreams are always symbolic, and they present some reality. For example, when the Prophet Joseph saw that the stars and the sun and the moon were prostrating before him, of course, it meant that something symbolic is going to happen. And later on, when his father and mother and his 11 brothers came to him and submitted to his authority, and he said that this is the interpretation of my dream, it tells us that what you see in your dream is mostly symbolic. It's very rarely does it happen that it's literal. So the Prophet was shown these images in his dream, and they were symbolic of many things. And for example, the fact that he spoke to the Almighty regarding the fact that the prayers should be reduced, as one of these narratives say, that initially the prayers were 50, and during this ascension of this Miraj, the journey of Miraj, they were reduced to 5 ultimately. So again, the symbolism here is that the Almighty wants us to remember Him all the time, as much as possible. And it's like saying that we have to pray 50 times a day. But in fact, what we are being told is that we have to be vigilant and diligent in remembering the Almighty as far as we can. Of course, the 5 prayers are uh, do spell out specific times in which we have to formally submit ourselves to the Almighty and go through a ritual. But other than those 5 prayers, those 24 hours besides those 5 prayers, it's that in those remaining period of time as well, we have to be equally submissive in our dealings, in our attitudes. So it's like symbolizing a lot of things. I've just explained one of them. And if you go through those narratives, we have described them in some of our lectures, and you'll get to know that the vision of the prophet, the vision that he was shown, actually had a lot of education for him. And when he actually narrated his dream before the non-believers, they were struck and they actually made fun of this and said that how can you say these things, that you will get this and get that, and how can you say that you know that this is how heaven and hell are going to be. So it became a real means of trial for a lot of people, and those who were weak in faith or those who were hypocrites, they criticized the prophet, made fun of him, and thereby exposed themselves. And on the other hand, those who were true Muslims, those who submitted to God, knew that this was some information divulged by the Almighty in the form of a dream, and hence it had to be interpreted in a certain way.
So in the dream, Allah asked the Prophet to reduce the prayers from 50 to 5.
No, actually, the other way around. Basically, when the prayers were given, they were 50 in number, and the Prophet, when he went back to and met the Prophet Moses, as it is said, he actually told him that he should go back to the Prophet, to the Almighty, and ask him to reduce these number of prayers. And every time that he came back, he said, have them reduced further and further and further till those 50 became 5. So instead of thinking that they were actually 50 prayers and they were reduced to 5, basically the symbolism here is that the Almighty stuck to this fact that 5 formal prayers are sufficient as informality. They are the 5 formal times of remembering the Almighty. Other than those 5 formal times, we still have to be diligent and vigilant when we are not praying, implying the fact that we still have to show obedience in all other times. So, signifying the fact that not one instant of our 24 hours should be devoid of this vigilance and diligence.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, viewers, now we come to our second part of our study session, and we generally discuss some issue here, and it's always some either a misconception. It could be a misconception, or it could be something which we would like to point out. And today, viewers, I'd like to discuss something that we at times lose sight of, and at times we are not very particular about, and that is time management. So, time management, of course, is something which is of paramount importance in the life of every person, every human being. And remember, unless you become a good human being, a responsible human being, you cannot become a good Muslim, you cannot become a good Christian, you cannot become a good Jew, or any other follower of any religion. You have to be a good human being first. And one of the basic ingredients of a good human being is that he is a responsible person. And one of these responsibilities is that the time which the Almighty has afforded each one of us is a great trust. It's a great, great opportunity to do things that we should think of, to do, carry out tasks and abilities, which of course might be of interest. In other words, we have to think on the higher goals of life. And these higher goals of life, as well as our own professional routine, our personal routine, they all are amalgamated, they are all entrenched in a single 24-hour routine. So the bottom line is that we must not procrastinate. We must not waste time. People who waste time are in danger of being wasted by time. And people who are not organized in their time, they generally are underachievers. Generally, they do not fulfill their targets. Generally, they are not entrusted by their superiors with responsibilities because their superiors think that this is not a very responsible person. Remember, if you have to become a high achiever, if you have to become a person who is in a position of responsibility, if you are a leader, if you are a person who is in charge of various people, then more often than not, you are up against multitasking. You are doing more than one thing at the same time in your life. And for this, it's essential that we have to organize our lives, and every single instant of our life is very, very, I would say it's priceless. There's no price for time. And as the famous saying goes, that time and tide no man abide. Time does not wait for us. Time goes on. It's a very brutal thing if we do not take hold of it, and it's extremely friendly if we get hold of it. So let's get hold of our lives. Let's get hold of our time. And the best way to get hold of our time is always to organize ourselves, to plan for the future, to plan for the day ahead, for the week ahead, for the month ahead, and never let ourselves sit idle. Of course, this does not mean that we should not entertain ourselves. This does not mean that we should not be people who enjoy life through various means of amusement and entertainment and sports and various other things. Therefore, that is equally essential to all of us. But what it means is that we should not waste time. We should not kill time because time is so precious that if you have to become a high achiever in life, if you want to do something in life, then every single person, even if he is underprivileged, in the sense that he's not a genius, he's not an outstanding person who's as brainy as several other people, even then, if people get hold of their time and they get down to their own task and they set themselves a target in life and set about achieving that target, let me tell you, even people who are ordinary, even people who are less gifted, even people who don't have much ability, even they can achieve a lot simply by hard work. And remember, hard work only comes if you are an organized person, if you are always if you're always willing to capture a time, if you always allocating these time slots to your own life in which you divide every task that you have that is on your mind, which includes your professional responsibilities, your familial responsibilities, your social responsibilities, all of them, because as human beings, we interact in a society. As human beings, we live in a society. We have responsibilities. We cannot shirk our responsibilities. We cannot give them up. We have to be responsible individuals. And the key to this responsibility is time management. Time management is something in which we have to be a high achiever because you see, there is nothing which can stop us from becoming good time managers except our own selves. So we have to conquer this laziness in ourselves. We have to be vigilant. We have to be up and about, and we have to think what we can do best in various slots of time. So this is in one area in which I see many youngsters, I see even people of middle ages and people who have passed their middle ages, they are wasting time, they are killing time, and I see this expression often being floated by people that they say that I'm feeling bored. Boredom is something which I'm overcome with. So why should we feel bored if we have a plan in life, if we have a mission in life, if we have a target in life, if we set ourselves that we will go to achieve this thing? And of course, the only thing is that we have to organize ourselves. And if, as I said earlier on, if you are a leader, if you are a person who is in a position of responsibility, then you are a person who is bound to do multitasking. Because unless you're able to achieve this multitasking, you'll not be able to do something which is worthy of your position. And all persons who are in this position, they have to be good multitasking people, and this can only happen if they are very organized and they have very strict timetables to follow. And they, of course, as I said, this does not defy or deny our amusement time or our relaxing time. We have an equal opportunity to relax and to take life easy, but it should not be that we are sitting vacant. For remember, a vacant mind is the devil's playground. When you are vacant, you have nothing to do, then there are all sorts of evil thoughts which come to you. There are all sorts of bad things that come to your mind, and then they sit there, they grow there, and they produce their own progeny, and then your mind becomes a place where negative thoughts, where evil thoughts start themselves to generate. And once this generation starts, or when this generation goes on, this is an unending phenomena, and it is a self-destructive phenomena. It leads us to such destruction that we cannot even imagine. So let's make this fresh commitment today that we will become good time managers, we will allocate time, we will be responsible individuals, we will act responsibly by actually allocating time to various time slots, to various responsibilities, and never waste time. Because as I said, that if you have to become a high achiever in life, then the biggest weapon that you have is time. It's not money, it's not nothing else, it's time. And remember these four words, Time, they have to be the first priority in our lives when you think of utilizing something, when you think of achieving something, then the biggest weapon that you have on your side is time. And remember that if you don't have time on your side, it will always be against you. And it would be a pity that when we end up or we realize this, and we realize that a lot of time we have spent that we could have utilized. So let this regret not come to us, and let us start utilizing time right from today. So with these words, we come to an end to this fourth session as well. If you have questions, we will continue with the questions. Otherwise, so I see one hand. It's Miss Adila Asad. Okay, please go ahead with your question.
Assalamualaikum, Doctor. Yeah, my question is regarding your topic about patience. Sometimes it's really hard to get it when you see injustice or something. Usually I'm very patient, but sometimes it's really difficult. So I just wanted to ask how to achieve that, and if there's any dua we can say, if you can tell us anything about which we can recite to achieve that.
So there are Quranic du'as, supplications which are mentioned. You can just look up the Quran, for example, Rabbana afrigh alayna sabran wa sabbit aqdamana, which means God spill on us patience and steadfastness and make us persevere. And similarly, other prayers can be cited as well. But one thing which is really helpful in becoming patient, as I said, is what the Quran itself has spelled out, and that is "Wama sabruka illa billah," that you cannot be patient, you cannot be steadfast unless you have a strong God connection. Because you see, to become patient, you need this support, you need this backing that something is going wrong. If something is making our adrenaline pump, if something is making us angry, we need to hold ourselves. We need to get hold of ourselves and not react immediately. So unless we have that God connection, and unless we pre-plan, remember, if you want to become a patient person, if you want to become a person who has self-control, then what you need to do is you always need to pre-plan. And the way you pre-plan is that, as in psychology we say, this is called auto-suggestion or self-suggestion. You suggest to yourselves that, okay, when the crunch time comes, I'm not going to behave irresponsibly. I'm not going to react immediately. I'm going to delay my reaction. So this is what you suggest in normal times, not when the crunch time comes. This is what you start suggesting to yourselves, that whenever this crunch time comes, I'll get hold of myself. I'll try not to react. So when you say these words to your own self, and you whisper these suggestions to your own self, imperceptibly they seep down in your soul, and they start to find ground. And then you'll see that every time that moment arises, you remember your commitment earlier on. Somehow it flashes in your mind. And of course, you might not pay heed to it, and you still go on with that rush of blood. But what happens is that you get a chance to slow down because that flashback occurs. So when you keep suggesting to yourselves, these flashbacks occur more regularly, and they make you more patient, or they give you a chance to at least withhold yourself. And I would suggest that if you practice this more often, and if you keep practicing this as much as you can, there is bound to be a time in your life, maybe in a couple of months. It might even take a couple of years, because you see, habits take time to settle themselves in. So, but if you start doing it from today and imagining this in advance, that whenever something is going to happen, I'm not going to lose my self-control. And one day, this self-suggestion, inshallah, will get the better of you, and you'll get that flashback in which you'll say that today I am not going to get angry, I'm going to delay my reaction. And this is how, by constantly suggesting to yourselves, it is hope that you will get to this point. But what you do is that when you remember that you have to show patience in that rush of flood instant, is that you remember the Almighty, and you remember the fact that if something is happening against our will, because you see, when you get angry, it's often because things they don't happen according to what we have planned. Something unexpected comes us, or someone behaves in irresponsible manner, and we show our temper. So when something unexpected comes up, we remind ourselves that God is a greater planner. We planned something and that never materialized. On the other hand, God planned something and that is what materialized. So we have to surrender to the plan of God. So it's like telling us that if things didn't go our way, it went God's way. Those things went God's way. And therefore, uh, more often than not, we do realize that when things go God's way, later on, we always acknowledge that if this had happened, we would have really been done for. And it's good that it didn't happen. So you see, in hindsight, most of the time we do realize that things which happened unexpectedly, they actually went well in our way. And this actually builds our trust in God as well. And it tells us in hindsight that when things don't happen your way, there is some good, some wisdom behind them. And we have to learn to trust God, and we have to learn to withhold ourselves, because many a time in our lives we have seen how this has happened. That later on we have realized that if something did not happen our way, it was better that it didn't happen according to our way, because then such and such bad results would have arisen.
Yes, and that's a very good suggestion. I'll work on that. One more question I have regarding these you said, you quoted today. I just want to know, in the hadith, is that a, what should I say? Is it an advice or is it a hukum?
It's an exhortation. It's a counsel and advice. It tells us that you have to be as forgiving as possible. You have to be as compassionate, as magnanimous. If a person who makes a mistake, he is your subordinate, and that mistake happens accidentally or out of ignorance, then the same mistake can be committed by ourselves as well. And the person who is subservient to you, of course, he has sacrificed his ego or her ego by working for you, by calling yourself to be his or her master or his boss or whatever, and he or she is already in a compromised situation because of being in need. She is or he is someone who's working for someone, and of course is a compromise for that person. So when you start extorting that person for something which perhaps if you were in his place or her place, you would have done in the same way or maybe in a worse way. It tells us that human errors are something which have to be forgiven. And when I say human error, of course, I refer to the fact that errors which are made when you are you have not planned an error. It's not a planned mistake. It's accidental mistake. So it's like forgiving accidental mistakes, just as we would have liked ourselves to be forgiven when we commit an accidental mistake.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. So I have another hand, and this is Madam Farah Naz. Okay, please go ahead. I've unmuted your mic. Please go ahead. Uh, Farah Naz, can you please proceed with your question? We're not being able to hear you. Something is wrong with your mic, I think, because from our side, the mic is open. It's unmuted. So maybe you can email me your question or ask it in our next session. So viewers, with these words, we come to an end to our study circle, and inshallah hope to see you next week, the same time. Until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.